Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to NK Cheating Story. We truly appreciate every single one of you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. My name is Jackson Turner. I'm 45, a mechanic by trade, and a father to two amazing twin boys who are my whole world. For 8 years, I believed I had a strong, loving marriage, until one ordinary afternoon shattered everything. What I overheard that day wasn't just painful, it was life-altering. I thought the worst thing I'd face was a migraine. I had no idea the real pain was waiting for me at home. What do you do when the woman you trusted most becomes the one who breaks you? Well, you'll see what happens when a good man gets pushed too far. They say it's the little things that can bring down something great. A rusted screw on an airplane. A tiny clot in the brain. A patch of black ice on the road. Small, almost invisible, until everything shatters. I used to think that only applied to machines. I'm a mechanic, after all. Been one for over 15 years. I can hear a bad belt before it snaps. I can feel an engine misfire in my bones. But I never thought that same logic would apply to my marriage. Vanessa and I had been married just over 8 years. We weren't perfect, but who is? We had a nice house on the edge of town, two amazing twin boys, Ethan and Caleb, both 5, full of energy and love. I didn't have a fancy degree, but my job paid the bills, kept food on the table, and gave us comfort. I worked hard, sometimes too hard. I missed dinners, ball games, school nights, but it was always for them. For us. That day started like any other, until my head exploded in pain. I've had migraines before, the kind that knock you flat, but this one felt like it was sent straight from hell. It started with a flicker in my vision, then the pounding behind my eyes. Sound got sharper, smells turned rancid, and light was unbearable. I stumbled into my boss's office, clutching my head. "Jesus, Jackson, you look like death," he said, jumping to his feet. He didn't ask questions, just waved over Penny, the receptionist, and barked orders like a general. "Get him home. Now. He's not driving like this." Penny, bless her heart, helped me out to her car. I couldn't even open my eyes. The sunlight felt like someone jabbing knives through my skull. I pressed my palms into my temples, trying not to scream as we drove. I don't remember much of the ride, just pain, dizziness, and nausea. But eventually, we got to my place. She helped me inside, got me my Imitrex inhaler from the fridge, even helped me to the couch and shut all the blinds. The moment that medicine hit, I felt the edge soften. Penny whispered a quiet, "Get some rest," and let herself out. I don't even remember falling asleep. I woke up hours later. The room was still dark, the house quiet, at first. The pain was mostly gone, just a dull echo bouncing around my skull. I sat up slowly, grateful it hadn't come back. And then I heard voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Vanessa's voice, and someone else. A woman. Chloe Martin, our neighbor and Vanessa's closest friend. I stayed quiet, listening, thinking maybe they were just chatting. But then I heard it. "Come on, Vanessa. How was it this time? Was it better than before?" "Girl, it was amazing. Like, mind-blowing. Better than last time." I felt like I was in heaven. I froze. My blood turned to ice. I could hear the smile in Vanessa's voice. The giddiness. The pride. "Even better than with Jackson? Please. I love my husband, but he's never made me feel like that. Never. Derek just knows what I need. I can't stop. I don't want to." Derek. The name slammed into me like a steel wrench to the chest. My stomach twisted into knots. I leaned against the doorframe, trying not to collapse. "Aren't you worried Jackson will find out?" Chloe asked. "He's too soft. He won't leave. And even if he did, I'd take the boys. I'd win in court. No doubt." I couldn't breathe. She was right about one thing. I was soft. I bent over backwards for her, made excuses, worked overtime just to see her smile. I never questioned the late-night shopping trips or the sudden phone call she'd take in another room. I wanted to burst into the room and scream, but something in me held back. I don't know what it was, shock, pain, survival instinct. But I stayed in the shadows, listening to my wife dismantle our life with a whisper and a giggle. I felt something snap inside me that night. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the certainty in her voice. The arrogance. Like she knew I'd never fight back. Like she counted on me being weak. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. No, I was going to wait. I was going to watch. And when the time came, I'd show her just how dangerous a cornered man could be. I stood there in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. My hands trembled, not from the fading migraine, but from the truth I'd just heard. Vanessa, my wife of 8 years, the mother of my sons, had just declared out loud that another man made her feel more alive than I ever could. And she said it without shame, with glee. I felt sick again. Not the kind of sick that medicine could touch. The kind that eats away at your soul. The kind that hollows out your chest and fills it with something cold and heavy. And yet, I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't charge into the kitchen and unleash the storm building inside me. I stood there, listening, memorizing every word, every pause, every breath. Because if this was the end of my marriage, I wanted to know exactly what killed it. I love Jackson, she had said. But then came the real dagger. But Derek gives me what Jackson never could. I want both. It was a clean betrayal. Calculated. Cruel. And above all, it was deliberate. I took a slow breath and leaned against the wall for support. My legs felt like they'd give out any second. The migraine was gone now, but something worse had taken its place. Something sharper. Something permanent. In that moment, I saw everything with new eyes. The way Vanessa had become distant in recent months, the sudden excuses to stay out longer, the way she always kept her phone face down on the table. All the little signs I had ignored because I trusted her, because I loved her. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually their voices drifted into silence. I heard a chair scrape back. Footsteps. Laughter. That was when the switch flipped. No more hiding. I stepped into the kitchen, eyes adjusting to the light as I crossed the threshold. The room fell silent instantly. Chloe was mid-laugh when she saw me. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. Vanessa turned next, her smile vanishing as fast as it came. Her face shifted through a dozen expressions in a matter of seconds. Shock, guilt, anger, fear, and finally, contempt. "What the hell?" she snapped. "How long have you been standing there?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time in 8 years, I didn't see my wife. I saw a stranger wearing her face. "You were spying on me?" she barked, stepping forward. "Were you eavesdropping like some paranoid freak?" Chloe stood up awkwardly, mumbling. "I should go." She avoided my eyes completely as she slipped past me toward the back door. "Tell Greg I'll be by to get the boys," I said coldly as she disappeared. She nodded without turning around. Now it was just me and Vanessa, the woman who had just gutted me with her words and stood there like I was the problem. "Where are Ethan and Caleb?" I asked quietly. She crossed her arms. "They're at Chloe's. Greg's watching them." "So while you were here, reminiscing about your little rendezvous with your boy toy, the kids were next door being babysat by a neighbor?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't get dramatic. We went shopping earlier, and they stayed with Greg. It's not like I left them home alone." I let out a bitter laugh. "Right. Because shopping with Chloe always ends with a conversation about how another man makes you feel like you're in heaven." Her expression twisted into something ugly. The mask was slipping. "I wasn't with Derek tonight," she said sharply. "It was just Chloe and me." "Oh, that makes it better," I snapped. "You're just reliving the memories. Glorifying them. Plotting the next one. You don't get to judge me," she yelled. "You're always working. Always too tired, too distracted, too busy to notice what I needed. You think putting food on the table is enough? You think paying the bills makes you husband of the year?" "No," I said, voice low. "But I thought being loyal did." She flinched, just barely. But I saw it. I started to walk past her toward the bathroom. I needed to breathe. Needed to not collapse. But as I passed, she grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said. "Why were you even home? Your car's not in the driveway. What were you doing sitting in the dark?" I shook her off. "I had a migraine," I said, barely above a whisper. "George had Penny drive me home. I took my meds and passed out on the couch. I woke up to you talking about how you'd never give up your affair." She went silent. For the first time, something like panic flashed in her eyes. Then I felt the nausea rise again, uncontrollable and raw. "I'm going to be sick," I muttered, rushing to the bathroom. My stomach churned and heaved, even though there was barely anything in it. The pain came from deeper, beyond the gut, beyond the body. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor, heart pounding in my ears. I stayed there until the shaking stopped, until I could breathe again. When I looked up at the mirror, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. I splashed water on my face and rinsed my mouth. Then I stood, straightened my shoulders, and walked back into the kitchen. Vanessa was staring out the window, arms crossed tight, the room dim and silent. "I'm going to pick up the boys," I said. She didn't respond. I didn't need her to. Whatever this was, whatever we had, it was already broken. She just didn't realize yet how far I was willing to go to make sure she never forgot the damage she caused. The night air hit me like a slap in the face when I stepped outside. It was sharp, cold, and exactly what I needed. The walk across the yard to the Martins' house felt longer than usual. Every step echoed in my ears like a drumbeat, each one weighed down with something I hadn't felt in years: rage. Greg and Chloe Martin weren't just our neighbors. They were our best friends. Cookouts on the weekends, board games in the living room, holidays spent around each other's tables. They'd held Ethan the day he came home from the hospital. Greg helped me build the swing set in our backyard. And Chloe had stood beside Vanessa during the hardest years of her life. I thought we were family, but now I didn't know what the hell to believe. I knocked on their back door, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. A moment later, Greg opened it, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Hey, Jackson," he said, his tone cautious. "Everything all right?" "I'm here for the boys," I said flatly. "Are they ready?" Greg glanced over his shoulder, then stepped aside. "Yeah, they're in the living room with Carly. Come on in." I stepped inside, the warmth of their home hitting me like a wave I didn't want to feel. Everything looked the same: cozy, safe, familiar. It made me sick. I walked past the kitchen where Chloe sat at the table, a mug of tea in her hands. She didn't look up. Her knuckles were white around the handle. So she knew. "Evening," I muttered, not expecting a response. I didn't get one. In the living room, Carly, their teenage daughter, was helping Ethan and Caleb with a jigsaw puzzle. The boys lit up when they saw me. "Daddy," they shouted in unison. I forced a smile. "Hey, champs. Time to head home." Carly stood up, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I'll grab their jackets." "Thanks, Carly," I said softly. I looked at my sons, my heart cracking just a little more. They were so innocent, so untouched by the mess their mother had made. And God help me, I didn't want them to carry this weight. Not now. Maybe not ever. I turned and walked back into the kitchen, where Greg and Chloe were both standing now. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. I stared at them both. "Did you know?" Greg blinked. "What?" I stepped closer, voice low but firm. "Did either of you know she was cheating on me?" Silence. Greg looked at Chloe. Her face said everything. "You did," I said, eyes locking onto hers. "You knew. And you didn't say a damn thing." "Jackson," she started. "Don't." I cut her off. "Just don't." Greg stepped between us, his face tight with restrained anger. Not at me, but at her. "You knew?" he asked her, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Are you serious right now, Chloe?" "I didn't know everything," she said, her voice cracking. "Vanessa told me things in confidence. I didn't want to get in the middle." "You didn't want to get in the middle?" I laughed bitterly. "You were in the middle. Hell, you were cheering her on. I heard your voice, Chloe. I heard every disgusting word." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at the floor. Greg turned back to me. "Jackson, I swear, I had no idea. If I'd known. Jesus, man, I would have told you the minute I heard. I'm so sorry." I believed him. Greg was a straight shooter. Always had been. His anger at Chloe was real, and for a second, I actually felt sorry for him. He'd just found out his wife had been keeping secrets too. "I'm not mad at you," I said to Greg. "But this..." I motioned toward Chloe. "This changes everything. My sons will never set foot in this house again if she's around. You understand me?" Greg nodded grimly. "Yeah, I do." Carly returned with the jackets. I took them from her, thanking her with a forced smile. "Thanks for watching them," I said. "You're a good kid." She smiled, but her eyes flicked toward her mom, confused. Maybe she heard enough to know something was wrong. Maybe not. Either way, she didn't ask questions. I knelt down and helped the boys with their coats. "Come on, guys. Let's go home." They each took a hand, and I led them out into the night. We walked in silence until we reached our front door. Vanessa hadn't moved from her spot by the kitchen window. I could feel her eyes on us as I unlocked the door. The boys ran upstairs to change into pajamas. I lingered for a moment in the living room, catching my breath. My hands were still shaking. She stepped into the room behind me, voice soft. "Everything okay?" I turned to face her. "From now on, if the boys go anywhere, it won't be to the Martins. Not while Chloe's around." She frowned. Why? What happened? You happened, I said coldly. Your lies happened. And the people who helped you hide them? They're done too. I walked past her, heading for the stairs. The boys were waiting in their room, full of smiles and questions about tomorrow. I tucked them in, kissed their foreheads, and stood at the doorway watching them sleep for a long, long time. They didn't deserve this. None of this was their fault. But they were going to suffer because of it. Because of her. And I'd be damned if I let her turn them into casualties of her selfishness. She thought I was weak. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady breathing of my sons in the next room. The innocence in their sleep, untouched by betrayal, unbroken by lies, was the only thing that kept me grounded. But even that peace couldn't hold back the storm building inside me. Downstairs, the silence between Vanessa and me stretched like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. I hadn't said a word to her after putting the boys to bed. I didn't need to. The weight of what she'd done hung in the air like smoke. Around midnight, I finally went downstairs to get a glass of water. She was sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, eyes red from crying. I didn't speak, just walked past her to the sink. You can't keep ignoring me, she said. I didn't look at her. Watch me. Jackson, please. Just talk to me. You want to talk? I turned, leaning against the counter. All right, let's talk. Who is he? What does he have that I don't? Is it the body? The charm? The attention you don't get when I'm working 12-hour days to keep a roof over our heads? Her face flushed. It's not like that. Then what is it, Vanessa? Help me understand. Because I'm still trying to figure out how the woman I married became a complete stranger in my own house. She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. His name is Derek. He's exciting, passionate. He makes me feel wanted. And I don't. She hesitated, too long. I felt the blow land deep in my chest. No fists, no shouting, just silence. That was all I needed to know. You're unbelievable, I muttered, shaking my head. I didn't mean for this to happen, she snapped. I was lonely, Jackson. You're always gone. Always tired. We haven't touched each other in months. I needed something more. Then you should have said something, I growled. You should have come to me, not crawled into someone else's bed. And what would you have done? She asked, eyes narrowing. Quit your job? Suddenly turn into some romantic prince? Let's be real. You never would have changed. I stared at her, stunned. Her words stung not because they were true, but because she believed them. I did everything for you, I said quietly. Everything. And still, it wasn't enough. She stood up suddenly, the chair scraping across the floor. You don't get to play the victim here. Don't turn this around on me like I'm some monster. You were absent, Jackson. You were a ghost in this house long before I ever met Derek. I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to yell. My fists clenched at my sides. And what now? I asked. Are you going to keep seeing him? Keep sneaking around while I raise our sons under a roof soaked in your lies? She folded her arms, her voice turning cold. I'm not ending it. Not yet. That was the final nail. I nodded slowly. Then we're done. Don't be dramatic, she scoffed. You're not leaving. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I am. She laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. You think it's that easy? You walk away and what? You get the kids, the house, your dignity? No, Jackson. You walk away from this, and I will destroy you in court. I'll take everything. The house, the savings, and the boys. You'll be lucky to see them every other weekend. My mouth went dry. She wasn't bluffing. She had it all planned out. I saw it in her eyes, the calculation, the cruelty. I'll make sure the judge sees what kind of father you really are, she continued, her voice rising. Gone all the time. Temperamental. Maybe even unstable. You want a custody battle? Bring it on. You'll lose. I stared at her in disbelief. You'd use our kids as weapons? I'll do whatever I have to, she said without flinching. You leave me, you lose everything. She walked past me then, heading toward the stairs, as if the conversation was over. As if she'd won. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. I followed her with my eyes as she disappeared upstairs. The house fell into silence again, but it wasn't peace. It was a ticking clock. A war had begun. A war I hadn't asked for, but one I would finish. I sat at the table for a long time after she left, the water in my glass untouched. My mind raced with thoughts of the future, of my boys, of the life she'd just torn apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight, But I knew one thing without a doubt. There was no going back. She thought I'd crawl, that I'd bend, like I always had. But she didn't realize something had changed. She didn't realize that the man sitting across from her tonight wasn't the same man who walked into that kitchen yesterday. That man was gone. She'd killed him. And what she'd left behind. That man was ready to fight. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, calm, calculating, cruel. Her threats echoed in my head like a drumbeat. I'll take everything. The house. The boys. You'll be lucky to see them every other weekend. I lay there in the dark, feeling like I was drowning in my own house. A house I worked myself to the bone to afford. A house she now used as leverage against me. By morning, I was running on fumes and rage. I showered, dressed, and packed a bag. Just enough clothes for a couple days, some toiletries, and the bare essentials. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't tell her where I was going. I just walked out the front door, threw my duffel in the truck, and drove. I called my brother, Mason, on the way. "You home?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, his voice groggy. "Why?" "I need a place to stay for a few days." "It's Vanessa." There was a pause. Then, "Say no more." Doors open. 10 miles out, tucked behind a long stretch of woods and gravel roads, sat Mason's place. A quiet, one-story ranch with more tools than furniture. He'd been living alone ever since his wife ran off with some guy from her yoga class 2 years ago. Never filed for divorce. Never really talked about it. But I knew it messed him up bad. When I pulled up, the porch light was still on. He met me at the door with a tired look and a half-empty beer in his hand. "You look like hell," he said. "Feel worse," I replied. He stepped aside. "Come on in." I dropped my bag on the floor and sank into the old leather recliner like it was the only thing holding me together. Mason grabbed another beer from the fridge, cracked it open, and handed it to me. "Now," he said, settling in across from me. "Tell me everything." So I did. I didn't hold back. I told him about the migraine, about hearing Vanessa and Chloe talk, about Derek, about her shameless confession, about the confrontation, the lies, the threats. Every disgusting detail. Mason didn't say a word until I was done. Then he leaned forward, his expression cold. "She's got some nerve," he muttered. "Threatening to take your kids. Your house. All while she's out sleeping with some punk. Nah, that's not happening." "She's not bluffing," I said quietly. "She knows how to play dirty. If we go to court, she'll make it look like I'm unstable. Like I'm the one who drove her to cheat." Mason shook his head. "We're not going to let it get to that." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean we get ahead of this," he said. "First, we find out everything we can about this Derek guy. Who he is, where he works, where he lives. Then we make sure he knows, loud and clear, that he's done." I looked at him, unsure. "You're talking about scaring him off?" "I'm talking about ending it before it ruins your life." He leaned back, his voice steady. "You said she's counting on you to stay quiet. Counting on you being the same old Jackson, reliable, passive, too soft to fight back. So don't be that guy anymore." I stared at the beer in my hand. My fingers trembled slightly as I gripped the bottle. "She said she wasn't ending it. That she can't," I muttered. "Like it's some addiction she's not ready to quit." "Then we make the choice for her," Mason said. "We give her closure." The words settled heavy in the room. Part of me was scared. The other part? The part that had been humiliated, betrayed, torn to pieces by a woman I once adored. That part wanted justice. "I don't want to end up in jail over this," I said. "You won't," he replied calmly. "Let me handle it. I know a couple guys. Real quiet. Real careful. Nothing stupid. Just a message." I nodded slowly. "All right. Let's find out who he is." "I already made a few calls," Mason said, grinning like he'd been waiting for me to agree. "Name's Derek Mills. Junior attorney. Works at a firm in the city, Lincoln, Rice and Holmes. Divorced. Lives in a condo near the courthouse. Drives a silver BMW. Thinks he's God's gift to women." I exhaled. So he had a name. A face. A life. Not for long. He messed with the wrong wife. Mason muttered, standing up. "And he's about to find out what happens when you disrespect a good man." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. That night, I stayed up late in Mason's guest room, staring at the ceiling. I thought about my boys. About the life Vanessa and I had built, and how easily she'd burned it to the ground. But the pity was gone. The heartbreak? Fading fast. All that was left now was resolve. She started this war. She thought I'd back down. But she was about to learn something very important about me. When you corner a man long enough, eventually, he stops backing up. He starts swinging. The next few days passed like a slow burn. I went to work, kept my head down, and played my part at home like nothing had changed. I spent time with Ethan and Caleb, made them breakfast, helped with homework, sat beside them while they played their games. I smiled when I had to. I laughed when they needed me to. But underneath, I was a storm on the verge of eruption. Vanessa seemed off, uneasy. She'd catch me staring sometimes, and quickly look away. She still tried to act like things could go back to normal, like her little affair was just a bump in the road. I didn't argue. I let her believe what she wanted. Because while she was playing house, I was preparing for war. On Thursday evening, I got the call. I was in the garage, organizing tools I didn't need to use, just to keep my hands busy. My phone buzzed once. The screen lit up. Mason. I answered without a word. It's done, he said. Lesson 1 delivered. Loud and clear. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. I just nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Appreciate it, I said quietly. He won't be a problem again, Mason added. Trust me. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. I stood there for a few minutes, heart pounding. It was strange, the sense of calm that settled in after. Not pride, not relief, just clarity. That night, Vanessa was unusually cheerful. She had the kids in bed early, lit a candle in the living room, even made coffee like she used to when things were good between us. Can we talk? She asked, setting 2 mugs on the table. I sat across from her, but didn't touch the coffee. I've been thinking a lot, she began, her voice soft. About us. About everything that's happened. I waited, eyes locked on hers. I know I hurt you, she said. And I know I've made mistakes, but I still love you, Jackson. I do. You're the father of my children, my husband. What happened, with Derek, it wasn't supposed to be a threat to that. It was just something I needed. Something I didn't get from you for a long time. There it was. The classic excuse. It doesn't mean I don't love you, she continued, inching her hand toward mine on the table. It was physical, that's all. It's over now. It won't happen again. I stared at her hand, then back up to her eyes. It's over. She hesitated. Yes, I promise. I leaned back slowly. Funny, because I already knew it was. Confusion flickered across her face. What do you mean? I folded my arms. I know who he is. Derek Mills, junior attorney. Drives a silver BMW. Lives in a condo near the courthouse. Ringing any bells? Vanessa's face went pale. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. You didn't end it, I continued. He did. Or maybe I should say, it was ended for him. She stood up abruptly. What did you do? I didn't move. You should call him. Ask him yourself. She stared at me, wide-eyed, then rushed into the other room. I heard the frantic dialing, the tremble in her voice as she said his name. Then silence. A few seconds later, she reappeared, eyes brimming with tears, phone clutched to her chest. He said it's over, she whispered. He said he regrets everything and never wants to see me again. That he'll stay away from me, from the boys, from everything. I nodded once. Smart man. Her face twisted. You threatened him, didn't you? I didn't need to, I said coolly. He just finally realized what kind of woman he was dealing with. She sat down, defeated, staring at the floor like the rug had just been yanked out from under her. You can't do this, she said. You can't just take control like this. We're a family. No, I replied. We were a family. You ended that the moment you chose him over us. She looked up, face trembling. Jackson, please, don't leave me. Don't do this to the boys. I told you it's over. You told me a lot of things, I said coldly. You also told me you'd take my kids, my house, everything I've worked for. You threatened to ruin me. Remember that. I didn't mean it, she said quickly. I was scared. No, I said, rising from my seat. You were confident. You thought I'd roll over like always. But you forgot one thing. I stepped closer, looking her square in the eye. You don't corner a man like me. Not when he's got something to lose. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't want to lose you. You already have. I walked out of the room, her sobs echoing behind me. The same house I once built with my own 2 hands now felt like a battlefield, and I had just won the first fight. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Vanessa walked on eggshells, barely speaking unless it was about the boys. She'd given up pretending everything was fine, but now she tried another tactic, fear. She'd seen the look in my eyes that night. She knew something had changed. The man she used to manipulate was gone, but I still played the role. I got up every morning, packed the kids' lunches, went to work, came home, ate dinner, tucked the boys in. She probably thought I was calming down, softening. But deep down, I was just getting everything in place. One night, after the boys were asleep and the house had gone still, she sat at the kitchen table again. Same place, same candle, same fake warmth in her voice. "We need to talk," she said. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from her, just like last time. "I know I've made mistakes," she began. "But can't we try to fix this? For the kids." I stared at her. The audacity in her tone was surreal. After everything, she still thought she had a say in how this ended. "Fix it," I said. "You think what's broken between us can be patched up with a conversation? I told you it's over," she snapped, her voice rising. "I ended it, Jackson." I tilted my head. "No, Derek ended it. Because he didn't like the reminder that messing with another man's wife comes with consequences." She flinched. "You didn't have to do that. You scared him half to death." "Good." Then the message landed. She stood, pacing. "So what now? You want to punish me? Make me beg for forgiveness?" "No," I said. "I want this marriage over." She stopped cold. "You're serious?" I pulled a folder from my jacket and placed it on the table. "Divorce papers," I said. "Filed this morning." Her face went pale. "You're ending it." "You ended it the moment you climbed into another man's bed," I replied. "This is just the paperwork." She shook her head. "No, I won't sign. You can't force me." I leaned in, voice steady. "You don't have to sign. It's already in motion. But if you fight me on this, if you come after the house or the boys, I will fight back. And I'll win." She laughed, bitter and hollow. "You really think the court's going to side with you? After what you did to Derek?" "What I did?" I raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't anywhere near him. Ask him yourself. If he even wants to speak to you again." Her mouth opened, then closed. She sat back down, stunned. I could see it. She was scrambling now, the controls slipping through her fingers like sand. "I'm not asking for revenge," I said. "I'm asking for fairness. You get your freedom, I keep the house. The boys stay with me during the week, and you can have weekends. No alimony. I'll handle child support if needed, but nothing more." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're cutting me out." "I'm protecting what's mine," I said. "You stopped being part of us the moment you decided to have your little affair." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I'd seen those tears before. I used to break at the sight of them. "Not anymore. Please, Jackson. I still love you." I sighed. "You don't love me. You love what I provided. The safety, the stability, the image. But me? The man? You threw him away when you decided he wasn't exciting enough." She shook her head, pleading. "We can go to counseling. Fix this." I stood up. "You can't fix betrayal with therapy. You fix it by not betraying someone in the first place." She cried harder now, covering her face with her hands. "What about the kids? What are we going to tell them?" "We'll tell them the truth," I said. "That things didn't work out. That sometimes adults make mistakes that can't be undone. But they're loved. They're safe. And they're going to be okay." She looked up at me, broken, but there was still defiance behind those eyes. She hated that I wasn't begging. Hated that I was the one walking away. "I should have seen this coming," she muttered. "You always were quiet. But deep down, you were dangerous." I leaned over the table, my voice a whisper now. "No, I was patient. You mistook that for weakness. But now you've seen what happens when that patience runs out." With that, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because I had taken the first step toward freedom, and she knew it. She had lost her grip, her leverage, her power. Now, all that was left was the final act. And I was going to make sure it ended on my terms. I spent the next few days in motion. Work, kids, paperwork. I stayed sharp, focused, calm, even as everything around me threatened to unravel. Vanessa tried to hold things together on the surface, especially around the boys, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't fold. She was used to the man who sacrificed everything for her, the man who forgave, who compromised. That man was dead. On Saturday evening, she waited until I finished dinner with the boys before pulling me aside. Her face was tight with forced composure, lips pressed into a brittle line. "I want to talk again." Privately, I followed her into the living room and closed the door behind us. The boys were upstairs playing, laughing, the sound of innocence in a house thick with lies. Vanessa sat, straight-backed, like she was preparing for a negotiation. I didn't sit. "I've thought about your terms," she said, eyes scanning mine. "And I want to make one thing clear. You might think you've won, Jackson, but I'm not giving up everything. I deserve something too." "Deserve?" I repeated, my voice steady. "You think you deserve something after what you did?" "I made a mistake," she snapped. "But you're not perfect either. You were gone all the time, buried in work. You didn't see me, didn't hear me. I was building a life for us," I shot back. "Providing for this family so you could stay home, raise our sons, shop at boutiques, and plan dinners with friends. That was my mistake, thinking loyalty was enough." She stood then, her voice rising. "You think working hard makes you a good husband? I needed more than a paycheck. I needed passion, connection, something that reminded me I was still alive. And you found that in Derek Mills," I said coldly. "A man who dropped you the moment he felt pressure." She flinched, then quickly masked it. "I don't care about Derek anymore." I stepped closer. "But I do. Because I had to sit in silence while you fed him the best parts of yourself, the parts that used to belong to me. I had to look at our sons every night, knowing their mother was across town playing house with someone else." Her voice cracked. "Jackson, I told you, it's over. He's gone." "You're right," I said. "He is gone. But so am I." I reached into my jacket and pulled out another envelope. Her eyes darted toward it like it was a live grenade. "What's that?" "Finalized court schedule," I said. "You'll be served officially by next week. My lawyer has everything in motion. We'll divide the assets, work out custody, and be done with this before summer's over." Vanessa's mouth tightened. "You're really doing this?" "I already did it." Silence fell between us, thick and suffocating. Then her expression changed, desperation creeping in behind her words. "You still love me," she said softly. "I know you do. You wouldn't be this angry if you didn't." I didn't answer. I just stared. "I made a mistake," she continued. "But people come back from worse. You're not just going to throw away 8 years, Jackson. Not like this. Not after everything." "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "I'm walking away from the fire you set." She stepped forward, trying to close the distance. "We can rebuild. I know we can. Just give it time. Please, for the boys." I stopped her with a single raised hand. "No more speeches. No more guilt. You didn't care about the boys when you were slipping out of our bed and into his. Don't weaponize them now." Tears finally fell. "Real ones, maybe. Maybe not." I didn't care anymore. "I can change," she whispered. "But I already have," I replied. She covered her face and sat down slowly, shaking. The mighty, proud woman who thought she could manipulate the outcome was unraveling right in front of me. And for the first time, I didn't feel pity. I felt peace. Later that night, I tucked the boys in like always. They hugged me tight, their smiles genuine. I kissed their foreheads and told them I loved them. And I meant it with every part of me that was still whole. I went back downstairs, grabbed my packed duffel bag from the hall closet, and headed to the door. Vanessa stood in the kitchen, eyes hollow. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I have a place," I said. "And I'll be by every evening to see the boys. They won't feel a thing until the time is right." She stepped forward again, but I stopped her with my voice. "Don't. Jackson, please. You made your choice. Now you live with it." I opened the door, felt the cool night air against my face, and stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind me, soft, final. As I climbed into my truck and drove off into the dark, something inside me loosened. The weight began to lift. She thought she could cheat, threaten, and win. But all she really did was set me free. And I wasn't coming back. Looking back, the pain didn't just teach me about betrayal. It taught me about strength, boundaries, and the quiet resilience we often forget we have. For years, I believed that sacrifice and silence were the foundation of love. I thought being a good husband meant enduring anything for the sake of family. But I learned the hard way. Love without respect is a slow form of self-destruction. To those in their later years, who've weathered life's storms and kept families together through grit and grace, let me say this: your kindness is not weakness. Your patience is not permission. If someone no longer values your presence, you're allowed to choose peace over pain. Stand your ground. Know your worth. Don't let history blind you to the truth in front of you. Sometimes walking away isn't quitting, it's surviving. It's preserving the part of yourself that still believes in dignity, in loyalty, in love that doesn't come with conditions. In the end, letting go wasn't the hardest part. Believing I deserved better, that was the true beginning.